All right, I want to talk a little bit about paint and painting. There's our friend Jackson Pollock. We don't want the inside of our house to look like a Jackson Pollock painting. Hopefully, I'm training you all well as to how to paint. So, drywall, any sort of end grain, all of our spackling needs to be primed. This is a picture of PVA primer. I think it stands for polyvinyl acrylate or something like that. That's a more budget oriented primer. It's fine. It's not very good for sealing up wood or anything like that. It's just for sealing up new drywall, new mud on drywall. Okay. The stuff I like to use as kind of like a general purpose primer is the Zinsser 123 with the blue label. We usually want to do 2 coats of paint at least. Every paint advertises itself as guaranteed 1 coat coverage, and I'm not really sure what that means. You have to do 2 coats on everything. Okay? We usually divide the paint process up into 2 parts, body and trim. The body refers to the walls and the ceiling, and the trim is doors, any sort of molding we have, any sort of trim we have around the doors. Sometimes people want to have a different ceiling color also, okay? But in kind of a spec home type thing, like College of the Redwoods is building, we're usually just going to do 1 color for the walls and the ceiling, and then we'll come back and roll and brush the trim on. Paint. Paint is a pigment, it's a resin, it's some sort of solvent, and maybe there are additives in the paint. Okay? Pigment is the color. Resins are glues and binders that hold all the materials together, help the paint adhere to whatever surface we're trying to adhere it to. And then the solvents, I have here, it's the carrier, but it's the thing that's dissolving the solid that we're trying to put on the wall. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different kinds of paint, but keep in mind that what we're trying to do here, and paint not only is aesthetically pleasing, it also seals and protects surfaces. Okay, so on the outside of the house, we're protecting the siding, we're protecting the trim. On the inside of the house, we're sealing up materials and making them easier to clean. Okay, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a piece of plastic onto those surfaces, onto the wall, onto the trim. Okay, and whatever the solvent is the thing that's dissolving that particular kind of plastic, and as soon as it evaporates, it's leaving the plastic behind. Okay. There's different kinds of additives. If you have a paint that's maybe difficult to brush, or if you want it to look really smooth, you can add something that's going to make it more brushable. If you're painting a bathroom or a kitchen or something like that, you can get some mildew-icide. There's lots of different additives that you can add to paint. And usually what you'll do is you'll purchase the additive at the paint store, and they'll add it into your paint and then shake it up, and it'll just be integral to the paint. Oil-based paint used to be paint. That's what paint used to be, okay? There wasn't, it wasn't divided up into latex and oil-based. It's not used as much anymore. Mostly where I see oil-based paint used is for primers. It's really, really good for covering up stains. If you have cedar or redwood and you're trying to paint that, you just have to use oil-based paint. There's no way around it. I keep trying to use latex paint because it's easier to clean, it's easier to use, and it never works. So I just keep having to go back to oil-based primer, especially for end grain. Okay, it's the only thing that'll seal up the end grain on cedar and redwood. You have to use paint thinner to clean up oil-based paint. If you try and use water to clean up oil-based paint, you're going to be very frustrated and it'll never work. A couple things about oil-based paint: it dries much slower than latex paint. It doesn't allow water to pass through, okay? And it's considered impermeable, okay? Some people think that's good, but hopefully I've been able to convince everybody that what we want is semi-permeable materials so that water vapor is able to pass through those materials. So if we have water trapped in the wall, if the wood gets wet, which it will, okay, we want that water to be able to pass through the paint and evaporate, okay, diffuse through. If you have oil-based paint on a surface, what's going to happen is that water is going to try and get through, and it's going to create a bubble. Okay, generally, if you use latex paint, that water vapor will be able to pass through. Latex paint, I love using latex paint whenever I can. Water is the solvent. You can clean it up with water, okay? You can do most things with latex paint, okay? Unless you're trying to prime redwood or cedar, I would just use latex paint for everything. It dries really fast. It doesn't give you a headache when you're trying to use it. And then one of the good things, like I said before, is it allows water vapor to pass through. So when your siding gets wet and that water is trying to get out, it can either go to the inside of the house or it can go to the outside, which is where we want it to go, and that latex paint will allow it to pass through. Shellac-based paint is used for certain applications, okay? The solvent is alcohol, denatured alcohol. They add poison to it, so don't drink it, okay, if you get any bright ideas. The reason they add poison to it is because they don't have to pay taxes on it that you would have to pay with liquor. Okay, so anyway, we don't really need to go into this too much, but alcohol dissolves the shellac. The shellac is the solid that we're trying to put on the wall, and it's suspended in alcohol. And when we paint, the alcohol evaporates and it leaves the shellac behind. Okay, it is horrible to work with. It's absolutely horrible to work with. But it's the best paint you can get for covering up stains and sealing up smells. Okay, people that smoke in their house and it smells like cigarettes and there's nicotine stains all over the wall, the shellac-based paint is the only thing that will cover that up, okay? But it essentially gives you a hangover instantly if you're trying to use this stuff. And then the other thing to keep in mind is just because it smells so bad and it's so good at covering up stains and smells doesn't mean it's the best paint for everything. Don't use it to prime exterior surfaces unless you're actually trying to seal up some stain or some kind of smell. Okay, it's not good for outside. Okay, and remember, you have to use denatured alcohol to clean it up, not paint thinner, not water. Okay, the sheen. When you go to pick out paint, they're going to ask you what kind of sheen you want, and that's how much gloss is in the paint. Okay, and we've got like a range here. Okay, flat has the least amount of gloss. High gloss has the highest amount of gloss. Okay, it reflects the most amount of light. Okay, the way you get the gloss is by increasing the binders in the paint. Don't ask me to explain that anymore. That's all I've got for you. Okay, flat paint is good if you're trying to cover imperfections because it doesn't reflect light. If you're doing a smooth wall, or if you're doing a ceiling or something like that that's going to reflect a lot of light that you're going to be looking at a lot, it's going to probably be the best choice. Okay, the more gloss you get, the more light gets reflected, and the more you're going to see all of those little imperfections that were left behind in the drywall phase. The really nice thing about glossier paint is it holds up better, and it's really easy to clean. People typically like to use semi-gloss or high-gloss paint for trim work because if it gets dirty, if it gets moldy, or whatever the case may be, all you need to do is get a damp rag and you can just scrub it and you won't take the sheen off. If you try and scrub flat paint or eggshell paint, anything that's down here like lower on the sheen spectrum, you could change the sheen of the paint. Okay, you could rub the paint off, but the glossier paints are going to be much more durable. All right, wrapping it up, we've got a lot of different types of trim. I didn't really get into like styles, like molding styles and stuff like that, but there are catalogs online that you can look at that have different profiles. Depending on what kind of architectural style you're trying to have in your house, there are moldings that look appropriate for that architectural style. Keep in mind that interior moldings are serving a functional purpose. Okay, they're concealing joints in the walls. We also want them to be aesthetically pleasing. We're trying to show off our craftsmanship inside of a room. Okay? I didn't mention it. I don't have a slide in this one, but when we were talking about doors, I talked about plinths, and in older homes, particularly Victorian style homes, they would have plinths at the bottom and the top of the door, where like at the junction of the baseboard and the casing. Okay, they were very decorative. They look really fancy. The reason people started using plinths was a functional reason. The planing technology wasn't there to plane material to the same thickness. It was tedious and expensive to hand plane all of those pieces to the same thickness where they met. So you installed that plinth block, and it broke up those different pieces of molding so that you didn't notice that they were different thicknesses. Okay. Moving on, caulking on the outside of the house is much different than caulking on the inside of the house. On the inside of the house, it's going to be very, very visible. We need to take a lot of care when we're tooling caulking and cleaning up caulking so that it looks smooth. We don't want to see the caulking, I guess is what I'm actually trying to say. We don't want to see caulking. We're using caulking to conceal a joint, to fill gaps. Okay, so we want to get a damp rag, smooth that caulking out so that it's not visible. Okay, and then when it gets painted, we have nice crisp lines. Okay. Also, keep in mind when you're painting, think about what kind of sheen you want. I would recommend using a flat paint for the ceiling. For one thing, people don't like sanding ceilings, and a flat paint is going to cover up the imperfections that are invariably going to be on a ceiling. If you're in a room that needs to be resistant to moisture, or you want it to clean easily, you're going to want to use a glossier paint, like a semi-gloss or a high gloss paint. So anyway, thank you all very much. Please feel free to email me with any questions you have.